So the Saints and Kellen Moore are putting the finishing touches on the offensive coaching staff. Sounds like we're waiting on Doug Nussmeier to officially take the job as OC. Appears to be all but done a done deal, but like we've said before, it ain't a done deal till the deal is done. A lot to talk about here. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. So I don't think it's been a well kept secret at all that Kellen Moore is expected to hire Doug Nussmeier as the offensive coordinator. Of course, bringing him over from Philly after bringing him over from Dallas to San Diego to Philly, Philly to New Orleans makes all the sense in the world. I don't quite know if we consider this confirmation, but Nick Underhill within the hour just basically threw a tweet out there. Saying it sounds like it's Doug Nussmeier to be the favorite. It's not a done deal, not done yet, but things are moving in that direction. And I don't think that's going to come as any big surprise, especially since we've been filling out the assistant slots on the staff on the offensive side. None of this is official, but it's being reported as likely to be official as soon as Nussmeier's named OC. And of course, we knew that Keith Williams is being retained. He was the one coach so far that we know for sure is carrying over from the previous staff. He's the wide receiver coach. Chase Haslett is going to handle the tight ends, son of former Saints coach Jim Haslett, but he worked with tight ends in Dallas with both Nussmeier. In fact, when Nussmeier was a tight end coach, Haslett was an assistant under him. He took over the tight end coaching job, and looks like he's going to have the same position here following Nussmeier and Moore over to New Orleans. Brendan Nugent, offensive line coach, worked 1 year as the offensive line coach when Moore was the offensive coordinator in San Diego in 2023, and heavy Saints ties. Through the Sean Payton area, working with the offensive line as an assistant, and then become an offensive line coach in his rather long tenure with the Saints, roughly about 8 or 9 years total. Announced today, Joel Thomas, the running back coach, another longtime Saint, from 2015 to 2023, is running back coach under Sean Payton and, of course, Dennis Allen. Looks like they're bringing him back in fold. He had last year spent 1 year as the running back coach with the Giants. And then just recently, in the last few minutes, Scott Tolzien, quarterback coach, is being added to the staff. He was an assistant coach with Dallas. They called him offensive assistant from 2020 to 2022. When Doug Nussmeier, who was the quarterback coach, left to go do the same job in San Diego in 2023, Tolzien was promoted to quarterback coach and was coach there in 2023 and 2024. This is a lot of tie-in, not only with Nussmeier and Moore in some of these positions directly, in the case of like Tolzien and Haslett, but also keeping kind of a tie-in with New Orleans. Keith Williams carrying over as the wide receiver coach from last year. By all accounts, a very good wide receiver coach and well-liked on the team. And I think both those things are important. You don't necessarily want to turn over the whole staff. If you can bring somebody in who's good at his job and well-liked by the players that are already sitting there, there's a benefit of that. And you see that very often doing coaching regime changes around the NFL. Two things stood out for me that I didn't even have to go back in my notes and look from when Kellen Moore had his introductory press conference after accepting the job. One was he mentioned motion and tempo, which is kind of self-explanatory in both cases, how he wanted to use both. Something we wanted to use both, and our motion increased last year under Kubiak. I don't quite know about our tempo, but it's two things he believes in. And I think it's two things kind of taking root around the NFL. More and more offenses are definitely motion and trying to go tempo when they can. Probably talk about that a little more as the season gets closer. But the other thing, and I think the way they're hiring coaching staff, the assistants, kind of backs up what I think their philosophy is going to be as far as scheme-wise, because he mentioned diverse running game. And he talked about the fact that when he was with Dallas, they were a zone team, but a lot of wide zone, sort of like what Clint Kubiak was trying to do last year here out of that Shanahan tree from San Francisco. They do it a lot. I don't quite know if Dallas was as heavy as the Shanahan Kubiak guys are in it, but they definitely ran effective zone scheme with some wide zone. And you got to think that in that span of 2021, 2022, Tony Pollard for Dallas was in there, and he had 2022 had a very good year the last year with Kubiak and Nussmeier. Chase Haslett was on that staff as a tight end coach. Of course, Nussmeier and Tolzien after they left. But McCarthy was still running because McCarthy is a zone guy and a wide zone guy, still running it. So some exposure there, bringing that into the coaching staff. But then he talked about how moving to Philly and I mean, you stop and think about that big, huge, really good, probably the best offensive line in football, probably coached by the best offensive line coach in football in Southland, went more gap scheme, man scheme, a lot more downhill running. And if you've got a two-headed monster in your backfield like Barkley and Hurts, makes a lot of sense. But I also know he didn't completely abandon a zone type scheme. Um, you watched Philly play, you could see some wide zone concepts, but a lot of inside zone too. Um, so diverse and balanced. I would be interested to see the breakdown in the number of zone versus gap they had going in Philly. But I don't think they favored particularly one scheme over the other. And if they did, it was probably gap. But and you watched Super Bowl, you saw just elements of that throughout the game. Inside, outside zone, gap slash man. Interesting thing is that when you're talking about bringing Brendan Nugent back, long time associated with the offensive line under Sean Payton and the running back coach in Joel Thomas, Payton was very similar in his schemes, where you could see elements of gap man, you could see elements of inside zone, you could see elements of outside zone. Um, I do not have the time, the weeks it would take to probably go back and break down his whole career as a Saints head coach. But you can kind of even think about the way he used Kamara and Ingram in the same backfield for a few seasons, and watch those highlights and see elements of both, and see how they could both kind of adapt to running uh, power runs in a man scheme straight downhill, or out of an inside zone, or even an outside zone. You will see all of that in Sean Payton, and two of his former coaches are on the staff. I think it's sending a clear signal, a lot like what the defensive coordinator signals were being sent about who we were interviewing for the coordinator job, about a fundamental shift from an even front to some type of odd front, or at the very least a mix of even and odd, from 4-3 to 3-4 type situation. I think you're seeing, based on what he said, and then this mixture of coaches, most of them fairly young, coming in and being exposed to different types of offensive scheme. Now, we're talking just about the running game, but I'm sure it's going to be influenced by the passing game also in these various places, because we know Prescott, Herbert, and Hurts, three distinctly different quarterbacks. He's brought in some coaches that dealt with all three of them, and he's known as the guy, I'm going to build the offense around with what I got. It sounds like it's not going to be one particular, I'm guessing, but based on want to be diverse running, mentioning the two types of schemes, zone versus gap, motion and tempo, he's telling me he wants to bring in a group of guys that can help him mold with what he has to work with, be diverse enough, be flexible enough, be able to adjust enough to get it to work and work correctly. So before we go, I have Jamal Singleton down there on the rundown list for a reason. Again, I think everybody was like, "Yeah, it's going to be Nussmeier," but they brought in Robert Prince and Jamal Singleton. Um, it's basically the Rooney Rule satisfies that, so we could go ahead and get the ball rolling on hiring Nussmeier. Prince longtime college coach, longtime NFL wide receiver coach, actually coached Kellen Moore at Boise State as a wide receiver coach and the offensive coordinator. And Jamal Singleton is a running back coach in Philly last year. So they worked together there. Hats off to Kellen Moore because these are two names I'm really not familiar, have been in the interview cycle at all towards offensive coordinators. So he helps gets their name out there. But the reason why I'm bringing up Jamal Singleton is because when I saw that he was coming in, and so I recognized the name, and when they said that running back coach Philly knew he was one of that Sirianni doesn't want to lose these hotshot up and coming rising star young coaches he's got all over the staff. While I was looking up some stuff on him, I ran across Adam Schefter quoted referring to him. Schefter's quoting an Eagles official, so don't really know who that is, but somebody in the organization, but described Jamal Singleton as a big part of what we do on offense and a rising star going forward. So I thought that was interesting to get him in. And in the back of my mind, and also with Parker, who we did the same thing on for the defensive coordinator job yesterday, going, are we maybe making an attempt to kind of get one or two of these young, brilliant, rising star minds off Philly staff onto ours, kind of giving them a little interview process as coordinators, but also maybe trying to lay the groundwork where you put, again, the assistant head coach tag, passing game coordinator, whatever would pass off as a promotion where Sirianni can't block him, which he specifically has said several times since Moore got hired. No, I don't want anybody taking these guys from me. I see them as Eagles coaches, and that they're going to stay here. So I thought it was interesting, worth mentioning. We'll see if Parker and or Singleton somehow make the final staff, which I expect probably by Friday will pretty much be finalized. We'll know who's doing what. So that's all I got for you today. And anything breaks on the staff or the coaches, or once it's all put together, probably a little more to talk about there. And I anticipate that's probably what we're going to be looking forward to. But don't forget, also, we've got all the off-season stuff's about ready to kick off big time, whether you're talking about the cap issue, who stays, who goes, can we even sign free agents, depending on how all that goes, plus the combine, getting ready for the pre-draft process, all before March 12th when the league season officially opens. So it's going to be heating up a little bit, a lot on our plate. So please keep coming back. Make sure you subscribe and you hit the notifications. That way you'll know when we're dropping some content. Definitely thumbs up in the comments. Let me know what you think about the coaching staff so far. I'm liking it. I can't see anything in there that's causing me any great concern, but I don't know if we know enough now to even really form an opinion whether or not I should like it or should be concerned about anything. But stay positive until something forces us not to be, I guess, and hopefully it won't. So with a little good luck and the magic of editing, I'm able to sneak this in because right before we uploaded the video, I saw on Twitter that the Saints have brought in another staff member from the Eagles. So breaking news, the Saints have hired, he was Eagles run game coordinator and assistant offensive line coach, TJ Pagnetti. Don't know what capacity yet. We'll probably cover the coaching staff in greater depth once it's finalized. But one thing I remember about this guy, 2007, he was an undergraduate at the University of Oregon and they called him assistant coach or coach assisting with whatever position, quarterbacks, offensive line. Doesn't really matter. He was basically an intern as an undergraduate. All intents and purposes, they basically walked into sophomore English and said, "Hey, TJ, you want to come help out with the football team?" That's kind of impressive. And, you know, he just may be one of those hotshot, up and coming potential star coaches that's buried on the Phillies roster or on Philadelphia's roster. Well, sounds like he's on our coaching staff now. So till I see you next time, I'm Tim. Peace out and who dat.